Usually, motive is not an issue, and is not an element. And we often argue this, like in murder, we don't have to prove why the defendant did it. We just have to prove that the defendant did it. But in these bias crime cases, we got to prove it.
At this month's local Public Safety Coordinating Council meeting, Multnomah County Deputy District Attorney B.J. Park gave an overview of how the prosecution of bias crimes and hate incidents has changed recently in Oregon.
Thank you, everybody. This is essentially part 2 of our look at bias crimes and hate crimes in Oregon, and what we can do to support those people who are survivors of bias and hate crimes. Today, we are lucky to be joined by B.J. Park, the Deputy District Attorney from Multnomah County. B.J., I just want to thank you again for joining us and turn the floor over to you. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Let me get share the screen for the PowerPoint that I have. There's been a new law that came into being not last year, but the year before, so 2019, July. And even though it's been a year and a half, it's really important to understand both the old law and the new law. And people may wonder, well, why do I have to know about the old law when it's not here anymore? Well, because there's still cases that the statute of limitations does not run on those. And the old law still is very similar to the new law. So it would still be relevant enough. So I've tried to break it down pretty simply. So here we go. So this is the old law, which is ORS 166.165. It's formally called intimidation in the first degree, or as I call it here, intimidation 1. It was a felony, and it was simply this. So the old law had 3 different possible ways to commit this offense. The first is this. 2 or more defendants acting together, and that applies to all 3 ways. And here's the first way to commit it. 2 or more defendants acting together, intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly, cause physical injury to victim. So that sounds like assault 4, but you have to have 2 or more defendants acting together because of defendant's perception of victim's race, color, religion, sexual orientation, disability, or national origin. So that's what I call the protected class of the victim. So that was the 3 elements of the first way to commit intimidation 1. Second way to commit it, and please notice the or, so it doesn't have to be both. So the second way to commit it is 2 or more defendants acting together with criminal negligence cause physical injury to the victim by means of a deadly weapon because of defendant's perception of victims, so on and so on and so on. Okay, and here is the third way to commit it, which is 2 or more defendants acting together intentionally place victim in fear of imminent serious physical injury, menacing essentially, because of defendants, and then so on and so on. So these were the 3 possible ways to commit intimidation 1 under the old laws. There was a intimidation second, or intimidation in the second degree, intimidation 2, which was ORS 166.155, and that was a misdemeanor, Class A misdemeanor. And there were 3 possible ways to commit this offense as well. The first is tampers or interferes with property, having no right to do so, or no reasonable grounds to believe that the defendant has such right, with the intent to cause substantial inconvenience to victims. This is essentially criminal mischief. Because of, and it's the same, everything else is the same here, because of defendant's perception of victims, one of these protected class, as I call it. The second way to commit intimidation 2 under the old law is intentionally subjects victim to offensive physical contact, which is essentially harassment because of victim's defendant's perception and so on. Okay, so that the rest is the same. The third possible way to commit it is a little bit different than the menacing statute, which is intentionally subjects victim to alarm by threatening one of these 2 things. A, to inflict serious physical injury or commit a felony affecting the victim or a member of victim's family, so it extends to victim's family member. Or B, to cause substantial damage to the property of victim or victim's family because of, and then so on and so on and so on. So here is the new law. So the new law is very similar to the old law. So basically, here is the elements again of intimidation 1. So what they did was they basically took away this element of 2 or more defendants acting together. So they took that away. The other thing they did was they added gender identity. So that's that. And then with bias crime 2, same thing. Everything is the same except for adding of gender identity with that same definition. And that definition is found in the statute itself. And this is also taking place of intimidation 2. It's the same statute section as intimidation 2. Bias crime in the 2nd degree, which is a misdemeanor. Proving motive. So this is the most important part. I know there's a lot of law enforcement out there, so I really want law enforcement to understand this portion. Usually motive is not an issue and is not an element. And we often argue this, like in murder. We don't have to prove why the defendant did it. We just have to prove that the defendant did it. We just know that the action is immoral and evil enough there where and it's that the motive doesn't matter. And a lot of times it's almost impossible to prove. We have no idea why. But in these bias crime cases, we got to prove it. If the defendant's perception of defendant's race, national origin, all of that stuff, religion, played, quote, any role, end quote, in the crime, then defendant's guilty of bias crime or intimidation. So that's the important thing, that it could be a mixed motive, that it does not have to be a primary or certainly exclusive motive, and it's not a but-for test.